The town of Ashford always seemed quiet on the surface. Rows of brick houses, narrow streets shaded by leaning oaks, and the faint smell of rain-soaked earth after summer storms. Outsiders often thought it was the kind of place untouched by the larger world's darkness. But for those who had lived here long enough, there was always something lurking, something unspoken that pressed at the corners of the silence. When the first body was found in a locked, unused cold storage room beneath the town's abandoned rail depot, the atmosphere shifted overnight. What had been dismissed as whispers and late-night rumors became the beginning of a story that would carve itself into Ashford's history. The victim wasn't a drifter. She wasn't a stranger. She was someone they all knew, one of their own. The investigation that followed would unravel friendships, dismantle reputations, and expose a predator who had hidden behind a mask of familiarity for years. Ashford wasn't big, but it was self-contained. One grocery store, 2 schools, a crumbling theatre, and a diner where most people ended their day over black coffee and pie. Everyone knew everyone, at least by name or face. Behind that familiarity was a rhythm of predictability that made the town feel safe, if not stagnant. Her name was Clara Evans, 27 years old, a school librarian. Clara was soft-spoken, loved books more than most people, and carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who preferred being in the background. Students remembered her as gentle, patient, the kind of adult who listened when no one else would. On weekends, she was often spotted at the farmer's market, buying jars of honey or fresh bread. She didn't own a car. She walked everywhere, rain or shine. She was ordinary, safe, the kind of person no one expected to vanish. On the night of July 12th, Clara was last seen leaving the library at 7:45 p.m. She waved to a student lingering on the steps, then disappeared into the warm dusk. 3 days later, the janitor of the abandoned depot noticed a foul odor seeping from the ground-level stairwell. When deputies pried open the rusted doors to the storage room, the light of their flashlights fell upon Clara's body, still, cold, and wrong. Her throat bore marks of restraint. Her hands were folded neatly on her chest, as though placed that way. And the look on her face, even in death, suggested she had seen the person who did this and recognized them. Clara's death shattered the illusion of safety. For the first time in decades, people locked their doors at night. Parents kept their children closer. The local paper, usually filled with bake sales and high school sports, ran bold headlines. Librarian found dead in depot storage room. Sheriff Grant Wallace, a man in his late 50s with thinning hair and a weary face, had served Ashford for most of his life. He was competent but not used to homicide cases, and leaned heavily on the state investigators who were brought in. The town turned into a web of suspicion overnight. Clara's co-workers were interviewed. The students she mentored were questioned. Old boyfriends were tracked down. Yet every lead seemed to dissolve. The autopsy revealed something chilling. There were faint traces of cold preservation on Clara's skin. Whoever had killed her had kept her body chilled for at least a day before placing it in the depot. That detail changed everything. It suggested planning, calculation, and access to refrigeration. A truck driver who had been seen near the depot swore he never went inside. He passed a polygraph. A former boyfriend named Daniel was interrogated for hours but had an alibi. Security footage showed him working at a gas station miles away. A homeless man who sometimes slept near the depot was held for 3 days. He was innocent. Meanwhile, rumors consumed the town. Some whispered that Clara had been secretive, that maybe she wasn't as innocent as she appeared. Others insisted this had to be an outsider, a drifter. Few wanted to admit the killer might be one of their neighbors. Detectives combing through Clara's apartment found a small notebook. Inside were simple, handwritten notes, students she was worried about, reminders to buy groceries, library tasks. But on the last page, there was a name, underlined twice, Mr. Harris. Leonard Harris was a respected figure in Ashford. A science teacher, mid-40s, charismatic, known for volunteering at the community center. Parents trusted him. Students admired him. On the surface, he was everything Ashford celebrated about itself. But Clara had written his name with urgency, as though trying not to forget. Investigators looked into Leonard Harris quietly at first. He had no record, no history of violence. But the more they dug, the stranger he seemed. He lived alone in a neatly kept house on the edge of town. His students described him as charming, someone who made science exciting. Yet co-workers admitted he sometimes lingered too long in conversations, asked personal questions, and kept odd hours. When deputies obtained a warrant, they searched his property. In the basement, they discovered a locked walk-in freezer. Inside were tools, rolls of plastic sheeting, and chemical cleaners. There was no body. Clara had already been found, but the implication was clear. DNA tests confirmed traces of Clara's blood inside the freezer. Harris denied everything. He claimed the blood had been planted, that he was being framed. But when detectives presented the evidence of Clara's notebook, his composure slipped. His eyes darted, his breathing quickened. Witnesses came forward. A student remembered seeing Clara and Harris arguing quietly in the library weeks before her death. A neighbor recalled Harris driving late at night, his car packed with supplies. Slowly, the image of him as a trusted teacher shattered. Still, the case wasn't airtight. Harris never confessed. Some townsfolk defended him until the end, swearing he was incapable of such brutality. Trials dragged on, appeals were filed, and the community remained divided. But for most, the truth was undeniable. Harris had used his position, his charm, and his access to conceal a darkness no one wanted to see. Clara wasn't his first fixation, just the first one the town discovered. Ashford never returned to what it was before Clara's death. The depot was sealed off permanently, eventually demolished. The library erected a small plaque in Clara's memory, for her kindness, her patience, and her love of words. Leonard Harris was convicted after years of legal battles, though questions lingered. Some believed there were other victims who had never been found. Others clung to the idea that Harris had been framed, that the real killer was still out there. For many, the most haunting part wasn't Harris himself, but the realization of how easily someone like him could hide in plain sight. Clara had seen through the mask, if only briefly. Her notebook had been the key, a single name that turned suspicion into certainty. The people of Ashford still talk about her. They still lower their voices when passing the old streets where Harris once lived. And every so often, when another tragedy happens in another small town, they remember. The monster isn't always a stranger. Sometimes, it's the person you trusted most.